There's a reason certain friendships within BTS have kept fans talking for over a decade, not because of rumor, not because of manufactured drama, but because what you can actually see tells a story of its own. Jungkook and Jimin, two names that when placed together tend to send ARMY into an absolute spiral. Their on-screen chemistry is undeniable. Their off-screen moments feel almost too sincere to script. And yet, every time the conversation starts, a third name quietly enters the room: Taehyung. So here's what this video was really asking. When you strip away the fan edits, the shipping tags, and the endless debate threads, what does the actual relationship between these three look like? What do the documented moments, the interviews, the behind-the-scenes footage, and their own words tell us? Because there's a difference between a bond that looks close and a bond that is close. And in BTS's case, the truth is far more layered and honestly more interesting than any secret ever could be.
Number 7. Jungkook and Jimin are incredibly close. To understand why the bond between Jungkook and Jimin carries so much weight, you first need to understand the environment that shaped it. BTS wasn't built overnight. The group was formed through Big Hit Entertainment, now HYBE, and officially debuted on June 13, 2013. What most casual observers don't realize is just how grueling the path to that debut actually was. The members trained together for years under conditions that were, by their own accounts, physically demanding and emotionally exhausting. Long hours, shared dormitories, limited resources, and an enormous amount of pressure for a small company with no guarantee of success. That's the context in which Jungkook and Jimin first began to know each other, not as co-workers, but as people who were living the same high-stakes reality, day after day. Jimin, whose full name is Park Jimin, was born on October 13, 1995 in Busan, South Korea. He trained at Big Hit for about a year before the group debuted, having been scouted during a street casting and later passing the audition after expressing a strong desire to become a performer. He studied contemporary dance at Busan High School of Arts, which gave him a foundation that would later become central to BTS's choreography identity. Jungkook, Jaeon Jungkook, was born on September 1, 1997, also in Busan. He was the last member to join BTS, and he did so at the age of just 15, after turning down offers from several other agencies, reportedly including SM Entertainment and JYP Entertainment, specifically because he was drawn to the presence of RM, who was already training at Big Hit. That decision, made at 15, would become one of the defining choices of his life. What this means is that Jungkook didn't arrive as a fully formed artist. He arrived as a teenager, away from his family, beginning a career in an industry that offers no safety net. And Jimin, just 2 years older, was already there. Now, 2 years doesn't sound like much, but when you're 15 and navigating the pressure of idol training in a foreign city, 2 years of experience and 2 years of emotional maturity can mean a great deal. The people who are already there when you arrive have an outsized influence on how you settle in, how you carry yourself, and who you become. That's simply how formative environments work. What's documented across years of content, from their early Bangtan bombs to their reality shows, live streams, and concert footage, is a consistent thread. Jungkook and Jimin are genuinely comfortable with each other in a way that isn't always common even among close colleagues. In group settings, they gravitate toward each other. In candid moments, they communicate in shorthand that speaks to years of shared experience. In interviews, both have spoken openly about the closeness they feel. During BTS's 2021 Permission to Dance on Stage concert series, for instance, the visual moments between the two were notable not just to fans, but to the wider media covering the events. And in various Weverse live streams and V-Live sessions over the years, Jimin has on multiple occasions brought up Jungkook unprompted, referencing things they'd done together, meals they'd shared, or simply how the younger member was doing. That's not performance, that's habit. That's the kind of casual, unthinking reference you make about people who are genuinely present in your everyday life. It's also worth noting that both Jimin and Jungkook are from Busan, which is a detail that might seem minor but carries cultural significance within South Korea. Busan is a city with its own dialect, its own distinct personality, and a strong sense of regional identity. Being from the same city, even among 7 members who are otherwise from different parts of the country, creates a natural point of common ground, a shared reference that the two of them have leaned into publicly and humorously over the years. Jungkook, speaking in various interviews, has described Jimin as someone he feels he can always rely on. In the 2021 documentary BTS Permission to Dance on Stage, as well as in the group's various behind-the-scenes content, the ease between them is visible in small, specific ways. The way they finish each other's thoughts during group conversations, the way they react to each other's performances with a level of attention that goes beyond standard group courtesy, and the way they tend to seek each other out during unstructured time. There's also the matter of their creative overlap. Both Jimin and Jungkook have been deeply involved in their own individual artistic development. Jimin with his solo debut album Face, released in March 2023, which charted internationally and debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200. And Jungkook with his solo album Golden, released in November 2023, which became the fastest album by a Korean solo artist to surpass 100 million streams on Spotify. The fact that both pursued solo careers with such visible investment, while still maintaining their connection to the group and to each other, says something about the kind of people they are. Grounded, driven, and clearly comfortable in their individual identities without needing to compete. None of this is secret. None of it needs to be inflated or dramatized. The closeness between Jungkook and Jimin is a product of time, shared experience, proximity, and genuine compatibility. It's the kind of friendship that forms when two people go through something difficult together and come out the other side still choosing to be in each other's orbit. But here's the part that the narrative around these two often glosses over. This closeness didn't develop in a vacuum. There was someone else in that room, in that dorm, on that stage, someone who has been woven into the fabric of both their lives just as deeply, in ways that are just as real. And that's where Jimin's own story becomes even more interesting to examine, because how he chooses to show up for the people he cares about has a very specific pattern, and Jungkook is far from the only one who's felt it.
Number 6. Jimin often looks out for Jungkook. There's a particular kind of care that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with grand gestures or rehearsed speeches. It shows up in small, consistent, almost unremarkable moments. And that's precisely what makes it so credible. That's the kind of care Jimin tends to extend toward Jungkook. To understand why this matters, it helps to go back to the beginning, specifically to what Jungkook's early years in BTS actually looked like. He joined Big Hit Entertainment at 15, which means he entered the trainee system at an age when most teenagers are still figuring out the basics of social navigation. He moved away from his family in Busan, relocated to Seoul, and began living in a shared dormitory with people he didn't yet know. The structure of idol training in South Korea is notoriously rigorous. Long daily practice sessions, vocal coaching, performance evaluation, physical conditioning, all compressed into a schedule that leaves very little room for the ordinary experience of growing up. In that environment, the people around you become your primary source of stability. And by multiple accounts, including from Jungkook himself, Jimin was one of the members who took an active role in making him feel at home. In a 2015 interview, Jungkook was asked which member he felt closest to, and he named Jimin. He's repeated variations of this across different interviews over the years, and each time he does, the framing is consistent. It isn't just about who he has fun with, but about who he feels genuinely safe with. That distinction matters. Comfort and fun are not the same, especially in a high-pressure professional environment. Jimin's attentiveness toward Jungkook has been captured repeatedly in candid footage. In the group's early reality content, shows like Rookie King and the ongoing Run BTS series, Jimin's awareness of where Jungkook is in any given moment, how he's feeling and whether he needs space or engagement is a recurring detail. It's not theatrical. It reads more like the quiet attentiveness of someone who has simply made it their business to pay attention. One of the more frequently cited examples comes from the group's 2015 trip content, where Jimin is visibly checking on Jungkook during moments when the younger member seems either tired or overwhelmed.
What's notable isn't the gesture itself, but the absence of fanfare around it. Jimin doesn't make it a moment, he just does it. That behavioral pattern, repeated across years of footage, is what fans of both members point to as evidence of something genuine rather than performed. There's also a specific moment that circulated widely in 2019 during a group live stream when Jimin noticed Jungkook was struggling with something emotionally and quietly repositioned himself within the frame to be closer to him without drawing attention to it. It was a small physical adjustment, but the timing and deliberateness of it were not missed by anyone watching closely. In 2021, during BTS's In the Soup Season 1, a reality program where the members spent time in a nature retreat away from their usual obligations, the dynamic between Jimin and Jungkook was particularly visible. The show's format, which emphasized unscripted downtime rather than structured challenges, gave viewers a window into how the members behaved when the pressure of performance was temporarily removed. In that context, Jimin's tendency to gravitate toward Jungkook, to initiate small acts of consideration, whether that was preparing food, being attentive during conversations, or simply making physical space for him, came across with a clarity that a more produced format might have softened. It's also worth examining this through what Jimin himself has said publicly. In multiple interviews and fan communication platforms, Jimin has referred to Jungkook with a level of warmth that he doesn't apply uniformly to every member, not because he cares for the others less, but because the texture of his relationship with Jungkook is distinctly different. He's described Jungkook as someone who has grown enormously, spoken with visible pride about his solo achievements, and made a point of publicly celebrating Jungkook's work even when he had his own projects demanding attention. When Jungkook released Golden in November 2023, which debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 and produced the single 7, which became the fastest song by a Korean solo artist to top the Billboard Hot 100, Jimin was among the most vocal in expressing genuine pride. Given that Jimin had released his own solo work earlier that same year, in March 2023 with Face, an album that itself reached number 2 on the Billboard 200 and demonstrated his range as both a performer and a creative, the fact that he directed public attention toward Jungkook's milestone, rather than drawing comparison to his own, speaks to a particular emotional intelligence. That's not a trivial thing. In an industry built on individual visibility, where charting positions and streaming numbers are currency, choosing to highlight someone else's win rather than leverage your own proximity to it is a deliberate act. Jimin has spoken in interviews about the importance of being someone his members can count on, not just professionally, but personally. And in the context of his relationship with Jungkook specifically, this is translated into a pattern of behavior that is documented, consistent, and spanning more than a decade. What it points to isn't a dynamic built on hierarchy or obligation. It's something more like the instinct that develops between people who have genuinely watched each other grow. Jimin watched Jungkook arrive as a 15-year-old, uncertain and far from home. He has been present, actively, deliberately present, for almost every significant chapter since. That kind of witnessing creates a bond that doesn't need to be explained or performed. It simply exists, visible in the accumulated weight of 1,000 small moments. And the fascinating thing is, Jungkook has never taken that for granted, because the way he shows up for Jimin in return tells a completely different kind of story.
Number 5. Jungkook deeply respects Jimin too. Respect, in the context of a group like BTS, is not a simple thing to measure. Every member publicly affirms every other member. That's part of the culture, part of the expectation, and frankly, part of the job. So when we talk about the specific respect Jungkook holds for Jimin, the question worth asking is, what makes it distinct? What separates genuine regard from professional courtesy? The answer, as it turns out, is in the details. Jungkook has spoken about Jimin with a consistency and a specificity that stands apart from the general warmth he extends to the group as a whole. And to understand why that specificity carries weight, you need to understand something about Jungkook's personality, because he is not by nature an effusive person. Those who have followed BTS across their decade-plus career know that Jungkook tends toward introversion in unscripted moments. He's articulate when he chooses to speak, but he doesn't fill silence for the sake of it. He doesn't offer praise that he doesn't mean, and he doesn't perform emotion with the same ease that some of his members do. This isn't a flaw, it's simply how he's built, which is exactly why the moments when he does speak directly and openly about Jimin tend to register so clearly. In a 2023 interview conducted around the time of his solo album Golden, Jungkook was asked about the people who had shaped him as an artist. He referenced Jimin without hesitation, not in the vague, inclusive way artists often reference their collaborators, but with specific acknowledgement of influence. He has, across different interviews and fan communication sessions on platforms like Weverse, credited Jimin as someone whose work ethic pushed him to take his own craft more seriously. That's a meaningful admission. It's one thing to say you care about someone, it's another to say they made you better. And Jimin's work ethic is in fact one of the most documented facts about him within BTS's history. Multiple members, including Suga, RM, and Jin, have spoken about Jimin's relentless approach to practice and self-improvement. His background in contemporary dance at Busan High School of Arts gave him technical foundations, but what members have consistently described is his refusal to stop refining even when he had already exceeded the standard. In early BTS content, there are multiple documented instances of Jimin staying in the practice room hours after others had finished for the night. That level of commitment, visible and sustained across years, naturally has an impact on the people around him. And Jungkook, who was still forming his own professional identity during those years, absorbed it. The dynamic also reveals itself in how Jungkook responds to Jimin's performances specifically. In group settings, where the members watch each other rehearse or perform, and there is considerable footage of this, from Run BTS to various behind-the-scenes content, Jungkook's attention during Jimin's segments is notably focused. He isn't passive. He watches the way someone watches when they're actually studying what they're seeing. Given that Jungkook has developed into one of the group's most technically accomplished performers, earning recognition for his vocal range, his dance precision, and his stage presence, the fact that he identifies Jimin as a benchmark says something real. There's also the matter of how Jungkook navigates the elder-younger dynamic that is embedded in South Korean social culture. In Korea, the concept of hyung, a term used by younger males to address older males with respect and familiarity, carries genuine social weight. It's not just honorific language, it signals a recognized relationship, a positioning of oneself within a relational hierarchy that implies trust and deference. Jungkook consistently addresses Jimin as hyung, but more importantly, the way he uses the term with Jimin has a texture that differs from how he uses it with other older members. It's softer, more habitual, less formal. That particular register of address communicates something that a direct translation into English loses. It speaks to a relationship where the structure of respect has been inhabited so completely that it no longer feels like structure at all. What emerges from all of this is a portrait of mutual regard that runs deeper than the surface warmth of any group dynamic. Jungkook respects Jimin for specific, articulable reasons: his discipline, his artistry, his consistency, and his presence during the years that mattered most. It isn't abstract, it isn't obligatory. It's the kind of respect that forms when you watch someone do hard things well, over and over, for a very long time. And yet, neither of them arrived at who they are alone, because behind every version of Jungkook and Jimin that the world has seen, there are years of shared experience that involve far more people than just the two of them, and one of those was there from the very first day.
Number 4. They grew up together. Growing up is rarely a clean or comfortable process. It's messy, uncertain, and deeply shaped by who happens to be standing next to you when it happens. For Jungkook and Jimin, those formative years didn't unfold in the relative privacy of a family home or a school hallway. They unfolded in front of cameras, on international stages, under the scrutiny of millions of people, and they unfolded together. That's a circumstance that creates a very specific kind of bond, one that's difficult to replicate and nearly impossible to dissolve. When Jungkook joined Big Hit Entertainment in 2011, he was 13 years old. By the time BTS debuted in June 2013, he was 15. Jimin, meanwhile, had joined in 2012 after being scouted during a street casting in Busan, passing his audition on his first attempt. This means that by the time they stood together on stage for the first time, they had already spent months living in the same dormitory, eating the same meals, sharing the same anxieties about whether the group would make it at all. Big Hit Entertainment in 2013 was not the industry titan it would later become. It was a small company with limited resources, modest industry standing, and no established track record of producing successful idol groups. The members of BTS were acutely aware of this. In multiple interviews across the years, including the 2020 documentary Break the Silence, several members, including Suga and RM, have spoken candidly about the uncertainty of those early years, the financial pressure on the company, and the genuine possibility that the group might not survive its first few years in the industry. That kind of shared precarity does something to a group of people. When you don't know if your next album will keep the lights on, when you're watching your company make difficult decisions with limited margin for error, when the gap between success and failure feels genuinely narrow, you either fracture under the pressure or you pull together. BTS pulled together, and the relationships that formed under those conditions carry a weight that more comfortable beginnings simply don't produce. For Jungkook specifically, the early years were defined by an accelerated process of growing up. He has spoken, in interviews and in the group's Burn the Stage documentary released in 2018, about the disorientation of being the youngest, a feeling simultaneously pushed to perform at the level of members who had years more experience, and uncertain about whether he was actually capable of meeting that standard. In Burn the Stage, there is a particularly raw sequence in which Jungkook breaks down emotionally during a tour stop, visibly overwhelmed by physical exhaustion and the cumulative pressure of performance. It was a moment that the documentary didn't soften or contextualize away. And in that sequence, the members who moved toward him first were Jimin and Taehyung. That detail matters, because it speaks to something that no highlight reel captures. The fact that growing up in BTS meant not just achieving things together, but falling apart together. Being seen at your lowest by the people you work with every day, and having them respond with presence rather than distance, is formative in a way that shared success simply isn't. Jungkook debuted at an age when most performers haven't yet figured out who they are. And across the years that followed, through BTS's slow climb from a small company's debut act to a group filling stadiums worldwide, his identity as an artist was constructed in real time, in public, alongside people who were doing the same thing. Jimin, who was himself still developing as a performer during those years, was navigating his own uncertainties. His vocal style, his performance approach, his sense of artistic self, all of it evolved visibly across BTS's discography from 2013 to the present. Watching each other figure it out, watching each other struggle and improve, creates a kind of intimacy that external admiration simply can't replicate. There's also the matter of the physical and logistical realities of dormitory life. The BTS members have spoken across various interviews about what it was actually like to live together in close quarters during their trainee and early debut years. Limited personal space, shared schedules, constant proximity. That level of togetherness accelerates familiarity and either produces genuine closeness or genuine friction. What the documented history of BTS suggests is that for Jungkook and Jimin, it produced the former. By 2016, 3 years into their debut, BTS had begun to break through in a meaningful way. The Most Beautiful Moment in Life series had connected with audiences far beyond South Korea, and the group was beginning to build the kind of international fanbase that would eventually make them one of the most recognized acts in the world. Through that entire arc, Jungkook and Jimin were evolving alongside each other. When Jungkook's voice matured, when his stage presence shifted from technically competent to genuinely commanding, those changes happened within a context that Jimin had witnessed from the beginning. And when Jimin's performance style sharpened, when the contemporary dance training and the idol training finally synthesized into something that was distinctly, recognizably his, Jungkook was there to see it happen. That shared timeline is not a small thing. By the time both of them released solo albums in 2023, Jimin in March with Face, Jungkook in November with Golden, They were two fully formed, internationally recognized solo artists. But they were also, still, the same two people who had once practiced in the same room as teenagers, uncertain about whether any of it would amount to anything. The fact that they got from that room to where they are now, without the friendship fracturing or fading, tells you something about its foundation. It wasn't built on proximity alone. It was built on the specific, irreplaceable experience of going through something genuinely difficult together and coming out the other side still recognizing each other. But growing up together doesn't mean growing up identically. And within the same group, the same timeline, the same dormitory, there was someone else who had his own way of being close to both of them, a presence so distinct that his absence from the Jungkook Jimin conversation has never quite made sense. Number 3. Taehyung has his own special place. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. In almost every conversation about Jungkook and Jimin's closeness, Taehyung gets framed as the third wheel, the one who exists at the edge of the picture, the one whose position within the group's emotional architecture is somehow less defined or less certain. That framing is not just incomplete, it's factually wrong. Kim Taehyung, known professionally as V, was born on December 30th, 1995, in Daegu, South Korea. He's the same age as Jimin, and like both Jimin and Jungkook, he is from a city outside of Seoul, which gave him the same experience of relocation and adjustment when he moved to the capital to train. He joined Big Hit Entertainment in 2011, making him one of the longer-tenured trainees before the group's 2013 debut. And his path into BTS contained an element that none of the other members shared. He was, for an extended period before the debut, kept largely secret. Big Hit maintained his presence as a kind of reveal, which meant that even within the group's early promotional rollout, Taehyung occupied a distinct position, present but not yet fully introduced. That detail is a small window into something larger about who Taehyung is within BTS's dynamic. He has never quite fit the expected mold, not as a trainee, not as a debut member, and not as a solo artist. His personality is idiosyncratic, his artistic interests run unusually wide, and his emotional expressiveness tends to operate outside whatever register the conversation around him assumes. He's deeply serious about art and simultaneously capable of being the most disarmingly unguarded person in the room. That combination makes him difficult to reduce to a simple role in any group narrative. His relationship with Jungkook, often referred to by fans using the portmanteau Taekook, is one of the most extensively documented friendships within BTS, built on a foundation that is just as long and just as specific as the Jimin-Jungkook dynamic. Taehyung was among the first members to form a close bond with Jungkook when the youngest joined the group. In early BTS content, the two are frequently together, not because they were staged to be, but because the footage consistently places them in the same orbit during unstructured time. They share a similar sense of humor, a mutual comfort with physical closeness, and a kind of communication that, like Jungkook's dynamic with Jimin, tends toward the unspoken. In the Burn the Stage documentary released in 2018, Taehyung's emotional investment in Jungkook is visible across multiple sequences. The moment referenced earlier, where Jungkook breaks down during a tour stop, is particularly telling in Taehyung's response. He doesn't try to resolve the moment or manage it. He simply stays close. That kind of instinctive presence, unfiltered and without agenda, is consistent with how Taehyung tends to show up for the people he cares about. Taehyung and Jimin's relationship carries its own distinct weight. The two were close before BTS debuted. Both were trainees at the same time. Both are the same age, and both share a friendship that has been explicitly referenced by both parties as one of their most important personal relationships. In a 2021 Weverse livestream, Taehyung spoke about Jimin with a directness that was notable even by his standards, describing him as someone who understands him in a way that doesn't require explanation. Jimin has said similar things about Taehyung in separate interviews. Their dynamic, which fans often call Vmin, has generated its own substantial body of documented moments across more than a decade of shared content. What's particularly worth noting is that Taehyung's closeness to both Jimin and Jungkook didn't diminish or get displaced when the Jimin-Jungkook bond became more widely discussed. The three of them have shared space, shared milestones, and shared difficulties simultaneously, often within the same documented moment. The In the Soup seasons, for example, capture all three of them in a natural, unscripted environment, and what emerges is not a picture of two people who are close and one who is adjacent, but a triangle of distinct, genuine relationships that don't compete with each other. Taehyung's solo career has also added a new dimension to how his individuality, and therefore his unique place within these relationships, is understood. His debut solo album Layover, released in September 2023, was a deliberate departure from the conventional K-pop sound. It was jazz-influenced, introspective, and textured in a way that reflected his stated artistic influences, which include musicians like Frank Ocean, Erykah Badu, and the broader canon of jazz vocalists. Layover debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200, making him one of the few solo Korean artists to chart that high with an album of that sonic character. The record was a statement of identity, and the members' response to it, Jungkook and Jimin, both among those who expressed public support, reflected the same pattern of genuine regard that runs through all three of their relationships. Taehyung has spoken, in interviews and in personal reflections shared through platforms like Weverse, about the importance of the BTS members as the people who have known him longest outside of his family. That's not rhetoric. For someone who spent the most formative decade of his life within the structure of the group, that statement reflects a literal reality. The people who watched him grow, who shared the pressure and the success, who have been physically present through both, those people are not interchangeable. So when the conversation frames Taehyung as somehow peripheral to the dynamic between Jungkook and Jimin, it misses something fundamental. He isn't outside the picture. He's part of the same picture, just standing in a different part of the frame. And the reason these three relationships, Jungkook Jimin, Jungkook Taehyung, Jimin Taehyung, can all exist simultaneously, with full force, without canceling each other out, says something important about the nature of the larger group dynamic that produced them all. Because what looks like closeness between two people is almost never just about two people. Number 2. Not rivalry, but friendship. There's a tendency, when observing a group of highly competitive, highly visible people, to look for the fault lines, to search for the tension underneath the surface warmth, to assume that proximity and shared ambition must eventually produce friction, resentment, or some form of quiet competition. It's a natural impulse, and in the entertainment industry, it's an impulse that is sometimes justified. But when you apply that framework to Jungkook, Jimin, and Taehyung, the evidence simply doesn't support it. What the documented record shows, across more than a decade of content, interviews, behind-the-scenes footage, and individual public statements, is not three people managing a rivalry beneath a professional exterior. It's three distinct personalities who found, across years of shared experience, a way to be genuinely close without requiring each other to be the same. That distinction matters more than it might initially seem. Competition within a group like BTS is not an irrational concern. 7 members, all of them talented, all of them vying for stage time, vocal lines, screen presence, and individual recognition within a group identity. The structural conditions for rivalry are entirely present. And Korean idol culture, by design, creates additional pressure points, charting positions, solo milestone comparisons, fandom metrics, and a media landscape that actively frames members against each other in order to generate engagement. Every time a BTS member releases a solo project, the numbers are immediately stacked against the others. Billboard positions, streaming counts, album sales. The comparisons are automatic, often reductive, and almost entirely driven by outlets and fan communities rather than by the members themselves. What's notable is how consistently Jungkook, Jimin, and Taehyung have refused to participate in that framing. When Jimin's Face debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 in March 2023, a genuine milestone, the first album by a Korean solo artist to achieve that specific position, the response from both Jungkook and Taehyung was publicly supportive and personally warm. There was no trace of the careful, managed congratulation that people offer when they're concealing something. There was specificity in what they said, and timing that suggested they were paying attention to each other's careers not as benchmarks, but as things they were genuinely invested in. When Taehyung's Layover debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200 in September 2023, a similar pattern repeated. And when Jungkook's Golden dropped in November 2023, producing 7, which topped the Billboard Hot 100, and became one of the most streamed Korean solo singles of the year. The response from both Jimin and Taehyung was immediate and unforced. Within the space of a single year, all three had achieved significant solo milestones. The fact that this did not produce visible tension, competitive posturing, or even the subtle undercurrent of comparison that you might expect speaks to something foundational in how they relate to each other. Part of the explanation lies in personality. Jungkook, Jimin, and Taehyung are genuinely different people, different in temperament, different in artistic sensibility, and different in how they engage with the world around them. Jungkook tends toward precision and discipline. His artistic development has been defined by a relentless drive to close the gap between what he can do and what he envisions. Jimin operates from a place of emotional expressiveness combined with exacting technical standards, a combination that makes his performance style immediately recognizable. Taehyung is the most openly eclectic of the three, drawing on influences that span jazz, classical art, contemporary film, and a personal aesthetic that resists easy categorization. These aren't competing versions of the same thing. They're genuinely different artistic identities. And because the differences are real rather than manufactured, there's less friction to manage. You don't feel threatened by someone who is doing something fundamentally different from what you're doing. You're more likely to be curious about them, to be interested in what they're building, and to find the differences complementary rather than challenging. There's also the question of what BTS itself represents to each of them. In interviews across the years, all three have been consistent in framing the group not as a vehicle for individual advancement, but as the central fact of their professional identity. Jimin, in a 2023 interview around the time of Face, said explicitly that he approached his solo work as an extension of what BTS means rather than a departure from it. Taehyung has said similar things about Layover, that it was a way of expressing something personal precisely because BTS had given him the foundation to have a personal voice at all. Jungkook has repeatedly described his connection to the group as inseparable from his identity as a performer. When three people share that level of investment in the same collective project, individual success within it stops feeling like a zero-sum competition. It starts feeling like evidence that the collective is working. The Run BTS series, a variety program that has documented the group's internal dynamics in an unscripted format across more than 150 episodes, provides a long-form record of how Jungkook, Jimin, and Taehyung actually behave around each other when the stakes are low. What it shows is three people who genuinely enjoy each other's company, who tease each other with the ease of people who have long since established the boundaries of the joke, and who navigate group dynamics without the careful positioning of people managing a hidden power struggle. The interactions are too specific, too habitual, and too unrehearsed to be sustained performance. Friendship within a group of 7, across more than a decade, under the conditions that BTS has operated in, global scrutiny, military enlistments, solo career divergences, and the ongoing negotiation of individual identity within a collective brand, is not guaranteed. It's not even common. Groups have fractured over far less. The fact that Jungkook, Jimin, and Taehyung have arrived at 2024 with their individual friendships intact, their mutual regard visibly genuine, and their support for each other's work consistent and specific, that's not incidental. It's the result of a choice, made repeatedly, to prioritize the relationship over the rivalry. And that choice, more than any chart position or streaming milestone, is what makes the dynamic between all three of them worth paying attention to in the first place. Because when you look at what they've built together, not the music, but the actual structure of how they treat each other, it tells a story about the kind of people they've decided to be. And that's ultimately what makes the final point the most important one. Number 1. They always support each other. There's a version of this story that ends with a definitive answer, a clean declaration about who is closest to whom, which relationship is the most meaningful, and what the hierarchy of connection looks like within BTS's inner circle. That version of the story is more satisfying in a certain way. It's easier to share, easier to argue about, and easier to build a thumbnail around. But it's not the true version. And the true version is actually more interesting. What the decade-plus documented history of Jungkook, Jimin, and Taehyung actually reveals is something that doesn't reduce neatly to rankings or pairings. It reveals a structure of mutual support that has operated consistently across wildly different circumstances: debut anxiety, commercial breakthrough, global fame, personal struggle, military service, and solo reinvention. And the most remarkable thing about that structure is not that it exists, but that it has held. Support, in the context of BTS, is not an abstract value. It's a documented behavioral pattern, and it becomes most visible precisely when the circumstances are most difficult. Consider the period between 2022 and 2024, arguably the most complex chapter in BTS's collective history. In June 2022, RM announced that the members would be pursuing individual activities more independently, a statement that was widely, and somewhat incorrectly, interpreted as a disbandment. The reality was more nuanced. The members were entering a period of solo artistic development while managing their forthcoming mandatory military service obligations under South Korean law. The statement was clarifying, but it was also a genuine shift in the group's operational reality, and it landed with emotional weight for both fans and members alike. What followed was a staggered series of solo releases, public appearances, and military enlistments that tested the group's cohesion in a very practical sense. Jin enlisted in December 2022. J-Hope followed in April 2023. Suga began his service in September 2023. RM and V. Taehyung enlisted in December 2023. Jimin and Jungkook followed shortly after. The logistics of that timeline meant that for a significant stretch, the 7 members were not in the same place, not under the same daily structure, and not available to each other in the way they had been for the previous decade. And yet, the pattern of mutual support didn't pause. During the period before his enlistment, Taehyung made a point of being publicly present for both Jimin and Jungkook's solo releases. His attendance at events connected to their work, his social media engagement with their projects, and the specificity of his public comments about their music reflected active investment rather than passive support. Jimin, whose solo work had already established him as a credible independent artist by the time the enlistments began, did the same for Taehyung's Layover and for Jungkook's Golden. Jungkook, who was the last of the 3 to release a solo album, had, by that point, spent most of 2023 visibly supporting his members' individual milestones before his own arrived. This sequencing is worth noting because it speaks to something structural in how the 3 of them relate. Their support for each other isn't contingent on the support being returned immediately. It doesn't operate on a transactional timeline where you celebrate someone else's win because yours is coming up next. The documentary record suggests something more like a default orientation, a baseline assumption that the other person's success is something to be genuinely invested in, regardless of where you are in your own arc. The military service dimension adds a layer that hasn't yet fully resolved as of this video's creation. Being separated from people who have been constants in your daily life, people who have been physically present through virtually every significant moment for over a decade, is not a trivial experience. Several members have spoken about this in interviews and in fan communications. Jimin, in a Weverse post ahead of his enlistment, spoke about the members with a directness that reflected genuine awareness of what the separation meant. Jungkook, in his own communications before enlisting, said something similar. The acknowledgement wasn't performative grief for public consumption. It was the candid recognition of people who understand the specific weight of what they are temporarily stepping away from. What's also notable is how the period of solo activity, which might easily have created the conditions for the group to fracture along individual lines, instead seemed to clarify rather than diminish the collective identity. Each member's solo work, including Jimin's Face, Taehyung's Layover, and Jungkook's Golden, was deeply personal and distinctly individual. But each of them also existed in dialogue with the larger BTS story, drawing on the shared history and the collective foundation that the group had built. The solo careers didn't pull against the group identity. They extended it in new directions. And this is ultimately what the relationship between Jungkook, Jimin, and Taehyung demonstrates at its clearest, that genuine closeness within a group doesn't require uniformity. It doesn't require identical relationships, identical levels of intensity, or identical modes of expression. What it requires is a consistent willingness to show up, for the performances, for the difficult moments, for the milestones both large and small, and for the ordinary days that don't make it into any highlight reel. Jungkook has shown up for Jimin and Taehyung that way. Jimin has shown up for Jungkook and Taehyung that way. Taehyung has shown up for both of them that way. across different circumstances, different emotional registers, and different phases of a career that none of them could have fully predicted when they were teenagers practicing in a small company's training room in Seoul. That's the actual story. Not a secret relationship. Not a rivalry. Not a competition for who holds the most significant place in someone else's life. A sustained, specific, documented pattern of people choosing, again and again, to be genuinely present for each other. Which, when you consider the conditions they've navigated to maintain it, is the most compelling fact this video has offered. And it raises a question worth sitting with after everything you've just heard. Not about who is closest, but about what kind of friendship survives everything BTS has been through. So let's bring this back to where we started, because the question this video posed at the beginning deserves an honest answer. Is there a secret relationship between Jungkook and Jimin? The answer, after everything we've examined, is both simpler and more layered than the title of this video might have suggested. There is no hidden romance being concealed from the public. There is no clandestine dynamic that the cameras have somehow failed to capture across 14 years of near-constant documentation. What there is, and what the evidence consistently, clearly, and specifically supports, is a friendship that formed under genuinely formative conditions, sustained itself through genuinely difficult circumstances, and produced a bond that is real precisely because it was never manufactured. That's not a disappointing conclusion. If anything, it's a more interesting one. Because a genuine friendship, built from scratch between a 15-year-old from Busan and an 18-year-old from the same city, forged in the pressure of a small company's training room and tested across a decade of global scrutiny, that story doesn't need embellishment. It already has more substance than most narratives do. Jungkook arrived in 2011 as a teenager who chose big hit entertainment over larger, more established agencies because something about the people already there made him feel like it was the right place to be. That instinct, the instinct